For a provisional cast on, I prefer to use a working needle a good size smaller than the needle that the pattern calls for. So for example, my pattern actually says to cast on using 4mm needles. So I'm actually going to use a 3mm working needle for the cast on and a spare cable with end stoppers. There's a standard slip knot on the working needle to begin with. I hold the tied off end out of the way, place the cable behind the working yarn, and as you can see I'm holding the working yarn between my first and second fingers, ready to start looping. So the working needle goes behind and in front of the cable, picking up the working yarn every time, in front and behind. So in front and behind, in front and behind. If you count as you do this, every time you lift a stitch onto the working needle is one stitch that you've been told to cast on. You do not count the stitches that are on the cable underneath. They will be used later, for example, to add a neckband. When you become practiced in this method, it is possible to work relatively fast. I'll just give you a quick demonstration. There we go. So when you've cast on the required number of stitches, you need to turn the needle round. Now, if we just ensure that for the last stitch the yarn comes under the cable and loops around it, ready to work the first stitch. So check what the pattern says for your first row, be it knit or purl. Mine says purl, so I'm going to go into the front of the stitch, purl the stitch as usual. Now as you can see, when the next stitch is coming along, the leg of it wants me to work the back leg. Now you can take that off and replace it back on the needle so it looks like a normal stitch if you wish, then purl it. As you can see, the leg is ready for the next stitch, purl that as usual, or you can simply purl into the back of that stitch, and this is true for every alternate stitch. So we've got a standard leg here, so I can purl that as normal. The next stitch feels a little awkward, wants me to purl into the back of it, so here we go. So alternately each stitch will feel normal or not. Now if your pattern calls for you to knit the stitches, it's the same principle. Some stitches will have the legs where it again calls for this stitch to be knitted into the back leg. This stitch is normal, so knit into the front as usual, off the needle. Now I can either knit into the back of that stitch, or as earlier I can lift it and replace it and then knit into. You can do whatever you feel most comfortable with. I prefer to just alternate between knitting into the back of the stitch and knitting into the front of the stitch. And you carry on like that to the end of the row. If your pattern was in ribbing, it's quite easy to do in ribbing as well. Same principle applies. So purl 2, take the yarn over, knit 2, legs facing the wrong way, so I've lifted it off and replaced it, purl, purl as normal. The next stitch, the leg, wants me to work into the back of it, so here we go. Another purl, and so you could carry on in whatever stitch the pattern calls for to the end of the row. As we knit off the original provisional cast on stitches, it'll be necessary to untwist them again. You can either do this by knitting into the back of the stitch, and then the front of the stitch, the back of the stitch, and so on alternate stitches, or you can lift the stitch off and replace it on the needle.